righteous wrath and quoted chapter and verse or denounced me. And it's because I will argue with anybody unto the 9th hour, if necessary. I really think that the best ideas will come to the fore, and that there are no evil people. There is no group that with behavior. I mean, who among us cannot think back on our own behavior to moments that hardly exemplify the Gaian ethic? So then how can we expect more or anything better than that from other people? The real task, I think, is one of linking together through communication, which people don't realize when they're not communicating. But what we're doing right now, this is a very unusual activity. Even the most intelligent of us go through our ordinary day basically with grunts and groans. That's how we signal to each other. But creating a shared mind space, a consensus of understanding, requires people talking to each other and clearly speaking from the heart about what they know and understand. Ralph introduced me to the notion of clairparlance. This is a psychic ability that we're trying to cultivate. Clairparlance is clear speech. You know, William Blake said the truth cannot be told so as to be understood without being believed. That's the greatest weapon the truth has. But if it is articulated and you hear it, you will serve it. And so will George Bush, and so will anybody else who hears it. The power of the truth is its immediate, limpid rightness. And so cognitive activity, and this really goes back to the theme of the weekend, which is shamanism. To my mind, what shamans really are people who indulge in cognitive activity. They communicate, they dance, they sing, they chant, they tell stories, they speak out, they orate, they pray, they communicate. And in so doing, they empower everyone around them to open their hearts and their minds.
Reagan was a shaman, or is a shaman.
Oh yes, it's stage magic. And there is this, and you can't understand why it works. And it is morally neutral. This is the other thing. I mean, Goebbels, you can forget Ronald Reagan. This is a piker and a buffoon. Joseph Goebbels was the man who understood the power of information and communication. And if he believed the best idea wins, then he can only shake his head at the fate that overtook his ideas. Because here was a millennial dream that 12 years after it was launched, people were living in basements on rats. So it's a matter of allowing the ideas to fully express themselves through us. We can only advance into the future at the rate at which we can transform our language. And we can only transform our language by working with it. This is why design and art and music and all of these things are so important. The artist, who appears to be the weakest among us, actually creates the context for everything to happen in. So that it's so bizarre to hear right-wing politicians, for instance, talk about terms like spin and hype. And, I mean, they use the language by grafting certain concepts onto the language. You make it impossible for people not to agree with you. You actually foreclose the option of disagreement. They know this, and we know this. So this is the theater where the battle goes back and forth. To say what the world is in such a way that you convince everyone, and then we can get down to the business of living in that world. And history really is this process of trying to generate a guiding image that serves. And so someone, Christ, Mohammed, Buddha, will project the guiding image, and it gels in the unconscious and becomes a creode, and a vast set of historical forces follow it the way water follows a dry arroyo. But then the way is lost. It's not clear which direction the flow should go. Then there must be a new guiding image. And I think that the guiding image that we have been operating under, which is the property-owning male citizen, is giving way to a new guiding image, which is the planetary steward androgyne shaman. And this image reconnects us to nature, reconnects us to the lost part of ourselves, and will serve then until circumstances change, and then it too will have to yield to some new definition, because we are ultimately malleable. We are like water. We take upon ourselves the shape of the container into which we are poured, and this is what history is the flowing from one container to another.
I think that I wanted to just connect.
Sure.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask you to comment on a remark you made this morning about anticipating the future and how information drifts back through time. Could you say more about that?
I thought you would never ask.
Could you repeat the question?
What it refers to my comment this morning that a portion of shamanism is the anticipation of the future by accessing information which drifts backward through time. Well, I think my interpretation of what religion is, other than the scheming of eunuchs, is there is something there. There is something there transcendent and compelling. And what it is I think, an anticipation of a future event, an anticipation of a future state of human completedness, that actually ahead of us in time, our destiny, whatever it is casting an enormous shadow backward into what we call history. And that in fact one way of thinking about history is as the shock wave which precedes an eschatological event. 100,000 years ago, there was no intimation of an eschatological event. There were simply hunters and tribalism and animal existence embedded in the life of the planet. Then slowly there has grown, like an ever-increasing downward rolling boulder, a momentum of intuition that there is something, a great change is in store for us, that we are all going to become enlightened, or that the Messiah is going to come, or that the extraterrestrials are going to rescue us from ourselves. The intimation of a sudden shift of epoch and an ingression into ordinary history of the transcendental. Now, some psychologists might say this is nothing more than the culture's reaction to the inevitable fact of death, that every one of us will recapitulate this process, that death itself is like an enormous shadow at the end of life, sending a flickering signal back through our existence. And when you're young, death seems far away and has no power. But as you live your life, you suddenly realize that the walls are growing steeper, the water is moving swifter. There is a kind of inevitability, and that you don't want to stare this inevitability in the face. Well, I think the historical process is like that, and that we are in the grip of what I call a singularity, that it is cultural, that the evolution of techne to become an ever more limpid mirror of the self is turning into a kind of process where we are becoming the objects of our imagination. We